Welcome, everybody. Let's see your beautiful faces. We'll give folks a few more seconds to join in and we'll get started right away. And if everybody could just mute themselves, that would be great. Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everybody. This is Margarita Hosh from MK Medical Solutions, coming to you live with Mentally Fit. And we are talking to Lori Gottlieb, a psychotherapist and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, which is currently being adapted as a television series. In addition to her clinical practice, she writes Atlantic Weekly's Dear Therapist advice column and is co-host of the popular Dear Therapist podcast produced by Katie Couric. She is sought after expert in media such as the Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, CNN, NPR's Fresh Air, and her recent TED Talk was one of the top 10 most watched of the year. Lori can be found on Twitter at Lori Gottlieb1 and Instagram at Lori Gottlieb _author. Lori, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Such a pleasure. It is so great to have you here. We are very excited to talk to such an accomplished author and psychotherapist. So we'll just get right into it. How do you help couples find connection?
Well, I think that's what most people want. And when I think about who comes to me or who writes to my Dear Therapist podcast or who writes to my Dear Therapist column, I think it's mostly about people saying, we feel disconnected from one another. And it's not just romantic couples. I mean, you have parents and adult children, you have siblings, you have friendships. I think it's really this question of how can I love and be loved? And again, platonic love, romantic love. And I think the main thing is that people often think it's the other person that is causing the issue. So they're kind of like, the reason that this is happening is because this other person is doing this. And what I do with couples before they come in is I say, I want you, before you even step foot in the office, I want you to write down your goal for yourself in terms of what you can do to make this relationship better. And each person does that. And so when you come in, it's not oriented toward how am I going to get the other person to change? It's oriented toward what do I need to do to change to make things better? And then whatever the other person does will be influenced by what I do, but I can't make them change.
Oh my gosh, that is just on point. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that many of our therapists and attendees and folks that are going to be catching this after are going to be very, very find this very insightful. So, you're such an accomplished author. You had written Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, Marry Him, Stick Figure. Tell us, what was the most surprising when being on your author journey, writing these books? What did you find most surprising?
Well, I think that for people who have read Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, they know that that was not the book that I was supposed to be writing. I was originally supposed to be writing a book based on my Atlantic story, which was How to Land Your Kid in Therapy. I didn't want to write the helicopter parenting book. Then I was supposed to be writing a happiness book, and it ended up literally making me depressed. I ended up calling it the miserable, depression-inducing happiness book, and I could not get myself to write that book because what I really wanted to do was to share with people the privilege that I have every day, which is I get to, in non-COVID times, sit in an actual room, now in a Zoom room. I get to sit with people and talk about the human condition with them and talk about what the human experience really is and watch people grow and transform and change in small steps, in big steps, and really see their lives move from one place to another. And I think that, what we see out in the world is we see social media, we see conventional media, but we don't get to see what I see. And I think that we can all learn about ourselves as reflected through these stories of other people. So even though I'm telling in Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, I'm telling the stories of, I would say, 5 patients. There's 4 patients that I'm seeing, and we follow them through their struggles and their stories. And then the 5th patient is me as I go through something in my own life and I go to therapy. So you're seeing the process from both the perspective of the clinician and from the perspective of the patient. And I think that no matter who you are, what the feedback that I've gotten from readers is that they relate to every single person, all 5 of us, even though we might be strikingly different from one another and from the reader on the surface, that at our core, we are all more the same than we are different. And I think the joy of having put that book out there, and it's funny because when I first turned it into my editor, everybody said, originally, like, no one's going to read a book about this. People are just sitting in a room talking. and then when they got the book, they were like, oh my gosh, I laughed, I cried, I gave it to this person. It reminded me of this person. I saw myself in all of the stories. And I thought, well, maybe more people will read it than I had anticipated. And I thought maybe I should clean myself up a little bit, right? Because I was very raw and very authentic. And I didn't clean myself up. And I think, the book, of course, has done phenomenally well. It's sold, I think about 1 million copies at this point. And it's something that I think, because of the authenticity, people relate to it and people learn about themselves through the journeys of these other people.
Oh gosh, absolutely. It's really funny. There's a quote in your book that it's stuck. And the quote is, therapy elicits odd reactions because in ways it's like pornography. Both involves a kind of nudity. Both have potential to thrill. And both have millions of users, most of whom keep their use private. Oh my God. I don't know if I could even find the words to convey how much that statement resonated. And even more so, in our society, there is a certain sense of shame associated with, actually going to see a therapist. And especially in certain cultures. So, when folks hear somebody say that they're going to see a therapist, there's kind of that implicit bias, right? That comes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, that's one of the reasons what I'm trying to do and what my mission is with all of the things that I do is to really democratize therapy and take away this weird stigma that we have around emotional health, right? So we don't have that with physical health. With physical health, it's like, oh, I'm not feeling well or something feels off, I'm going to go to the doctor and get it checked out. Emotionally, if we feel like something doesn't feel right, I'm not myself, or I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious, I should go get that checked out. We don't do that. Usually people come to me when they're having the equivalent of, let's say, an emotional heart attack. They don't come when they're first having the chest pain. They come when they're actually having the heart attack. And it's interesting, why do we do that? Why is there so much shame around our, making sure that we are healthy, both physically and emotionally? And I don't really even separate them so much, because there's such a profound mind-body connection that if you are having some kind of emotional issue, it's going to affect you physically. And if you're having some kind of physical issue, it's going to affect you emotionally. So they're very much intertwined. So I think that part is really important. And I think the other part is, that's why I started a new podcast this year called Dear Therapists. And I do it with Guy Winch, who is a psychologist in New York and a fellow TED Talker. And we teamed up because we both have advice columns. I have an advice column in The Atlantic. He has an advice column with TED. But we said, you know what? We want people to hear these conversations. So people come on, they get 2 therapists for the price of 1, and which is free, by the way. And they write in a letter just like they would to an advice column. But then we do kind of like a therapy session with them. It's not actual therapy, but you have 2 therapists who are talking you through your problem the way that therapists do. And then at the end, we do something interesting. We give them advice, and it's very concrete, actionable advice. And they have 1 week to go try it. And you hear it all on 1 episode, but they come back and report to us, how did the advice go? What happened? And I think that's where the real learning comes in. That's what's so unique about that format. And that's why we wanted to do that in a podcast format. Was in the advice column, you don't get to hear what happened. And so we get to hear, well, you said to do this, and here's what happened when I did it. And I think you can learn so much from not only what worked, but what didn't work. And you also learn that in the course of one session, people can make significant change. People have this idea about therapy that you go for years and you're never going to leave and you're just going to talk about your childhood the whole time. And what we're showing in the podcast is that you can make a profound shift in some family dynamic, in some shift inside yourself, in the stories you're telling yourself, in the ways that you're stuck, in your blind spots, in your ability to perspective take, by just having that one conversation.
Oh wow, that is. I'm seeing some heads nodding, and some folks are sending me private comments. They're like, that nailed it." So thank you for that. So you know, I have this image. My first introduction, kind of in seeing therapy in the world, was when I saw Sharon Stone on Will and Grace as the cigar smoking, cigarette smoking, scotch drinking, straight talker who took nothing from no one. And I was like, wow, that if that was how therapy is like, that must be really, really interesting. So you have a really unique story and a journey. I mean, you started out really in media in Hollywood, then here, and now you're getting really back into setting the record straight on what it is like to really be inside of a therapist's seat with your new show that's going to be upcoming. So my question to you is, what has the media gotten right and so wrong about therapy on TV?
Yeah, I think there are two tropes of therapists in the media. And the first is that kind of blank slate, the brick wall, you go to therapy and the therapist doesn't say much and they kind of say, uh-huh. And they're not really participating in a conversation with you. There's not that kind of presence. And I think the other one is the therapist who says, like, tell me how you feel, use I statements, all the sort of cliches, that is, it's just not how therapists talk, and it's not how we work, and it's not really effective. And I think the other big trope is the therapist as kind of a hot mess, the therapist as a train wreck. You see that in treatment, right? The therapist who is crossing boundaries, doing all kinds of inappropriate things, just falling apart completely. Now, what I'm telling, and maybe you should talk to someone, is the story of a breakup. And at the beginning, yes, I'm having trouble with it, but it's not like I'm a hot mess, right? It's like I'm having a normal reaction to an unanticipated breakup. And then there's something below it, which is what my therapist Wendell points out, is this whole thing where I say, when half my life is over, and he says, you're grieving something bigger, right? So I'm having a big reaction because it wasn't just about the breakup. It was about something much bigger in my life that I hadn't addressed. So my reaction is, what we would say a typical reaction to those kinds of things going on. But it's not like, you're, I think these shows where, the therapist is like really struggling in these ways that are affecting the person, so that they're not really competent or capable. Right. So I think that what I say at the beginning of maybe you should talk to someone is that I say that the reason I chose to include my story, to include me as the fifth patient, is that I didn't want to position myself as the expert up on high. I wanted to show that I know what it's like to be a person in the world. And I say, I'm a card-carrying member of the human race. I wanted to show that. And I think that our humanity as therapists is what helps us to be so effective. If we didn't know what it was like to struggle in whatever ways, because every human being does, we wouldn't be able to help our patients. So that's number one. But the number two of that is, it doesn't mean that we are, incompetent, incapable, crossing boundaries, inappropriate. It just means that we're normal people.
Oh gosh, so that is perfect segue into the next question. Um, Understanding the importance of that humanity, right? What do grad students, we have a lot of folks that are in members of Therapist Toolbox, that are not yet fully practicing therapists. They are either in supervision or they are finishing up their grad school. So what do they need to know that really, unfortunately, they don't know, because it's not being taught to them? They're not being exposed to it, right? What is it that they need to know while they are being supervised or in grad school that will allow them to really be successful later?
Right. I think one of the things that I feel like a lot of people in that situation get from maybe you should talk to someone is just what I learned in the course of the book too, which is how do you bring your authentic self, your personality as it is, into the room in a way that is appropriate, without crossing boundaries. And I think Wendell, my therapist, does a beautiful job with that. He's a little bit quirky, he's a little bit unconventional, but he never does anything that crosses a line. And every way that he brings himself into the room is very strategic, and it serves a purpose. And I think you see that when I do that with my patients too, that what will I disclose and why? And when will I use humor and why and with whom, and how. There's no cookie cutter way of doing therapy. So I think that when people are training to be therapists, they think that a therapist presents a certain way and it's
Mhm.
very homogeneous, and that's just not true. Every experience with a therapist is going to be different because every therapist is different. We see the patient differently. There are going to be common themes, but the way that we interact with the patient is going to be very different, and it's going to be effective in a different way based on the personality match of the therapist with the patient. And in fact, I say, and maybe you should talk to someone, that the most important factor in the success of somebody's therapy is the relationship with the therapist. It's all of the other factors matter. The modality you use, the number of years of training you have, um, your theoretical orientation, all of that matter, but they don't matter as much as the relationship. And so I think that for therapists who are entering the profession, to remember that the relationship matters so much. So you have to know what you're doing, but you also have to be your true self in the room. And to know, what does that mean to be my true self in the room, where it's still about the client. It's not about me, it's about the client.
Oh, wow. That is so profound. Thank you so much for that. So, what would you say is the most challenging about guiding a client's communication journey, especially
You,
couples?
you, you mean you mean their difficulty with communication? Is that
Yeah.
I think the most important part is, first of all, to help them to see something about themselves that they haven't been able to see in terms of how others perceive them. So, I talk in the book and also in my TED talk about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion, and I think you see this most profoundly in the TED talk, but in idiot compassion, it's where you're telling your story to your friends. This happened and this person did this, and here's what happened. And your friends say, yeah, they were wrong, you were right, that was terrible. You don't learn anything about your own role in that interaction. You're just getting this kind of support from your friends, but it's not really helping you. In therapy, what we offer is wise compassion. We hold up a mirror to you to help you to see something about yourself that maybe you haven't been willing or able to see. And what that does is it helps you to see that I have a role in the communication difficulties. I have a role in these interactions. I get to choose how I respond to somebody else. So it's not just this person did that, but what was my response, and how did that add to the tension between us? And what can I do differently? So I think that perspective taking, again, in the TED Talk, there's a lot of that. In the Dear Therapist podcast, we do entire episodes where we take someone through this exercise of perspective taking. So I really highly recommend the Dear Therapist podcast. Also for budding therapists, it's a really good way to hear how therapists talk to
Oh,
people. You can hear it, and it sounds like actual sessions. And they're not scripted at all. They're just, here's the letter and we go. So it's just like walking into a therapy room. But I think perspective taking is so important. And so when you want to help people with communication, you have to, imagine how will what I am going to say, how will that land on the other person? How often do we stop to think about that? Not often. We're just like, I have to say this because I'm right. But we don't think about, how will they hear this?
wow. So thank you so much for that. I think we've learned so much in the short time we've been together. We are coming up to the end of our conversation, but I just have two more questions for you. So the first one is, are niches and brands really important to a therapist? And if so,
So
we go about achieving them.
when I was first starting out, I wrote a piece for the New York Times Magazine called "What Brand is Your Therapist?" And it was about how frustrated I was that I didn't think about marketing at all. I thought, I'm going to go. I've done all this work. I've taken my boards. I've done all my hours, I've done all my training, and now I'm going to get to have my private practice. And nobody came, right? I mean, like you get like one or two people or whatever, but like, how do people hear about you? They don't know about you. And so I was really frustrated by the ways in which I felt we had to market ourselves. I understand the idea that you need to get your name out there so that you get referrals, but there was this whole idea that you had to kind of package yourself and brand yourself, and I just found that sort of antithetical to what we do. So that's what that article was about. And I don't think that you need a niche. I think that you need to be really good at what you do, and I think that word of mouth will follow, and you have to be really patient in the beginning. But I do think that it's important that you have colleagues and that you're in a consultation group, so that if you get a referral and there's some conflict and you can't see that person because there's all kinds of reasons that you can't see somebody, that you'll refer to people in your consultation group and they'll refer to you, and to have really be surrounded by colleagues, because it can be very lonely being a solo practitioner if you don't have these different groups of colleagues that you're in regular contact with.
Oh my gosh. So, yeah, definitely. Just everything is resonating. So, before I ask you the last question, I did want to remind folks that this is being live streamed inside of Therapist Toolbox on Facebook. We are going to upload this later for your viewing pleasure into the dashboard. This is Margarita Hosh with MK Medical Solutions, your healthcare implementation strategist, helping providers launch thriving private practices across state lines, specializing in licensures and everything else dealing with helping you design a modern patient experience. So, our final question for you is, we talk about the importance of mental health, right? Since we are here with the Therapist Toolbox, the community by Mentally Fit, we really want to know, what does it mean to you to be mentally fit?
I think it means that you navigate through your world um, smoothly. And by smoothly, I don't mean that everything goes well. It means that when things don't go well, that you have the tools to help yourself manage your anxiety, help yourself manage the situation. You know when to reach out for help. You communicate in an effective way in your relationships. When things come up, you know how to have conversations that are helpful around that. I think that, and you get out of your own way. I think that a lot of people, that their biggest problem is that they are the ones who are getting in their own way, and they don't see it. That's the problem. They don't see how they're getting in their own way, and they think that all of the problems are sort of like caused by things out there, and they don't realize that, yes, there are, I am not minimizing the circumstances and the difficulties in the world, on every level, from the personal to the societal. But I also think that we do have choices about what we do in response to them. And so I think that resilience is really important. And resilience doesn't mean that you don't hurt or that you don't feel pain. What it means is that you know how to reach out and connect with others when that happens.
Oh my gosh, that is so profound. And your book is incredibly honest and raw. I don't think folks realized how honest and raw you were going to be when you took us into your journey of the breakup and that the boyfriend. And especially dealing with the gentleman with the really wonderful teeth and a really, really bright smile who associated everybody as that idiot. So, you know, having you here and have this conversation with us has been incredibly profound. Thank you so much. If there is any parting thoughts that you could share with us, or maybe really your thoughts on how clients and the therapists can get the most out of the therapeutic relationship, what would be your parting thoughts?
Yeah, I would say the thing that is most helpful for my clients, and I think it applies to ourselves as well, or we should apply it to ourselves, is I think that we need to focus on being kinder to ourselves and help our clients learn how to be kinder to themselves. So many people come in and they're so hard on themselves. They are so self-critical. And I think that we, as humans in general, can be so self-critical. And so I had this this patient come in, and I was trying to point this out to her, and she really didn't see that she was self-critical. And I said, I want you to go home and write down everything that you hear, this sort of voice in your head all the time that you're not really paying attention to, but I think part of you is paying attention to. I want you to write down everything that voice says to you in the course of a few days and come back and read that to me. And that comes from whenever I'm giving talks, I'll say to people, who is the person that you talk to most in the course of your life? Is it your partner? Lots of hands. Is it your best friend? Is it your sister? Is it your mother? You know, whoever it might be. And so many people raise their hands for that. But the person that we talk to most in the course of our lives is ourselves. And what we say to ourselves isn't always kind or true or useful. And so when I had this woman write down everything that she said to herself in the course of a few days, she came back and she started to read it. And then she said, I can't even read this. I am such a bully to myself. And there were things like, when she really listened for it, there were things like she had made a typo in an email and she said to herself, you're so stupid. Would you ever say that to anybody else who made a typo in an email? You're so stupid. She caught her reflection in a mirror and she said, oh my God, you look terrible. Right? And she did not look terrible. You would not think, nobody else looking at her would say she looks terrible. Right? And so I think we really have to pay attention to that voice and say, why are we so cruel to ourselves? Why are we so unkind to ourselves? Why do we hold ourselves to standards that we would not hold anyone else that we love? So I think that my parting words would be, pay attention to that voice, help your clients to pay attention to it, but also as a clinician and also in your personal life, pay attention, especially as new therapists, we can be so hard on ourselves. So pay attention to that voice.
Thank you so much, Lori. Guys, please make sure to follow her on social media. Again, her Instagram handle is Lori Gottlieb, 2 T's _ author. And her Twitter handle is Lori Gottlieb1. Mine is at MK Med Consultant or Margarita Hosh, Khosh. And please be sure to follow Lori on her website, read up on all of the wonderful information she has. Definitely check out her podcast and share your thoughts about what you thought about this conversation in Therapist Toolbox. Until next time, be kind to yourself, listen to what Lori's parting words were, and make sure that you practice kindness, and you are enough, you are loved, and you are definitely worth everything you are setting out into the world, and the world is better for it. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's continue to make healthcare a thriving success and remove taboo from mental health.
Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure.